Oh, hi, I'm Elaine Petrocelli, and I was at a seminar with a bunch of bookstores not too long ago, and they told me that nobody ever comes out for an event at midday, that everybody knows that. So I am so glad you didn't get the message. If you have your cell phone, if you put it to silent, I'd be really grateful. And thank you so much for not only coming today, but I see so many people who are here quite frequently supporting our store, and as a family bookstore that's been around since 1976. We want to thank you for keeping us right. But 20 years ago, a friend put a copy of The Sparrow in my hands and said, "You will be reading this." And I said, "Oh, I don't read science fiction." And she said, "You will be reading this." And since she was the friend who insisted I read The Prince of Tides, when I said that I thought it started out way too slowly, and she told me I really needed to wake up, I decided to believe her. And The Sparrow still resonates with me today. I think about it. I think about the Jesuits. I think about the Pope, and I'm not even Catholic. I think about food and what we do. I mean, amazing. So I became a Mary Doria Russell fan, which is great because The Sparrow was the first non-academic work that I was aware of. As you know, Dr. Russell has a PhD in biological anthropology, which I think, although I've never seen in any of her books her saying, "Did you notice how smart I am?" Those are the authors that really drive me crazy. I think that is behind a lot of the great thinking in this book. The Children of God, which followed The Sparrow, had me hooked just as much. And I actually want to read them both again, given where we're going in the world and space. And then there was the beautiful Thread of Grace and Dreamers of the Day. They're just gorgeous books, whether she's writing about saving Jews in Italy or flying into another galaxy. This woman is amazing. But then we got to Doc, and I don't read Westerns. But I read Doc, and it was one of my picks, and I fell in love with the characters, and Doc Holliday, who I'd never really thought a lot about, and wow. But when it was over, I wanted more, and thank goodness we got more in Epitaph, the novel of the OK Corral. And I don't know how many of you have read it. I am not going to talk about it very much because that's Mary's job. But I just want you to think about the fact that this book is set in 1881, and so many of the things going on, whether it's guns or people trying to supervise our borders or racism, seems like it's still here. And I thought it's time that we get better. So I am thrilled to introduce you to one of my personal favorites, Mary Doria Russell.
How many of you have heard of the gunfight at the OK Corral? Okay, so you know the names Doc Holliday, Wyatt Earp, Ike Clanton, right? Maybe the McLowry brothers, okay? What is up with that? Those guys were in a 32nd Street fight in a vacant lot behind a photography studio 133 years ago, and their names are still known around the world. There have been over 40 feature films about them. They've been the subject of radio plays, television series, PBS documentaries, and thousands of books, my own included. Just last year, Larry McMurtry who got the Pulitzer Prize for Lonesome Dove, wrote a comic novel about Wyatt and Doc called The Last Kind Word Saloon. Mr. McMurtry blithely admitted he did no research at all and tossed the book off in 3 weeks with a sublime indifference to fact, which is, I'm afraid, pretty typical. Generally, the only accurate things are the names, you know. Even so, the question remains, why? Why do we keep telling this story over and over? Out of all the conflict and the confrontation and gun violence of the frontier, why did those 30 seconds behind Fly's photography studio move to the center of what we believe about frontier justice in the Old West? Why is John Henry Holliday portrayed as a violent drunk? How did Wyatt Earp get to be the hero of the story when his older brother Virgil was the officer in charge? How did an inoffensive alfalfa farmer like Tommy McLaury get turned into an outlaw who deserves to die? How did Ike Clanton become the villain of the story? What really happened? When and why did the myth-making take hold? Those are the questions that I've tried to answer in Epitaph. Unlike some famous writers I just named, I go deep when I write historical novels. I dig into family histories. I get to know all the real people I am representing, getting to know them as human beings, not just as characters in a story to get pushed through a plot and used as I please. And I'm always very careful about their childhoods when I'm learning about them. I believe that our first 14 years are the basis of everything that comes afterwards. We spend the rest of our lives either building on a sound foundation, or trying to repair the damage, or wandering in the wreckage of those first 14 years. It was that deep research that showed me how much the villain, Ike Clanton, and the hero, Wyatt Earp, had in common. Neither Ike nor Wyatt was well educated, and frankly, I don't think either of them was working with a triple-digit IQ. It's not like woebegone, we're not all above average, and I think we're maybe just a little bit down on one side of that bell curve. Both of them were vulnerable to being used by men who were more agile intellectually. And that's an important element of their story. They were the same age. They were both born to fathers who were notorious for ungoverned rage. Now, you have to put that in context, all right? The past is not just now, but with horses. It was normal to whip small children. Spare the rod, spoil the child, right? Okay? But even in a time when literally beating the hell out of a little kid was considered good parenting, Newton Clanton and Nicholas Earp were considered unusually brutal. Ike spent his life wandering in the wreckage of his blighted childhood, and though Wyatt tried very hard to repair the damage of his, he was not entirely successful. To understand these two men, you need to know that they both had younger brothers who were very dear to them. Both Ike and Wyatt felt responsible for those brothers and took pride in protecting them from their father's wrath. Now consider this. Young Billy Clanton bled to death in Ike's arms minutes after the gunfight in which Tom and Frank McLaury were also killed. 5 months later, Morgan Earp was shot in the back and bled to death in Wyatt's arms. There's an almost Homeric symmetry to this. Between those two events, a careful and detailed legal finding cleared Doc Holliday and the 3 Earp brothers of wrongdoing in the death of Billy Clanton as well as those of Tom and Frank McLaury. Now, I'm a cop's daughter myself, so I'm very clear about this. Legally, the officers involved in this shooting were not culpable. If you read Epitaph, you will understand exactly why it is so difficult to indict a cop when an unarmed civilian has been killed, let alone convict one. Read Epitaph and you'll understand the emotional response to the exoneration of the Earps and Holliday in 1881 was almost exactly what is felt today every time a cop kills a civilian and walks away with what appears to be impunity. Think for a few moments about the death of Trayvon Martin and the exoneration of George Zimmerman. Okay, do you still remember who Trayvon was? Even though we've had this drumbeat of additional people. Trayvon's the kid in the hoodie who was walking home with his bag of Skittles. from the 7-Eleven and was killed by a wannabe cop named George Zimmerman. Like the family of Trayvon Martin, Frank and Tom McLaury's family took the matter as far as they could within the law. Like Trayvon Martin's family, the McLaurys accepted the outcome, even though they believe to this day that the exoneration of the Earps and Holliday was a miscarriage of justice. Now, imagine 40 feature films portraying George Zimmerman as a handsome hero, and Trayvon Martin as a violent gangbanger who somehow deserved to die. And you'll understand why the McLaury family is still pretty bitter about that 4 generations later. What the movies don't show is the way Ike Clanton's grief over his brother Billy's death was exploited by those who feared a crackdown on crime should Wyatt Earp be elected sheriff of Cochise County in the next election. Ike became convinced that the only way to get justice for his brother was to take the law into his own hands and attack the Earps directly. Virgil was crippled for life. Morgan was killed. What the movies don't show is the way Wyatt's grief over Morgan's death was exploited by the mine owners and businessmen whose investments were jeopardized by Arizona's increasing violence. Those men offered Wyatt a great deal of money and promised him a pardon if he went after the criminal element of Cochise County. He was told by a judge, "If I were you, I'd leave him dead in the mesquite where the alibis won't count." In 1882, Wyatt Earp carried out at least 5 extrajudicial executions, maybe more. We don't know if he took the money he was offered for that, but even the attempt to hire him as a contract killer is strong evidence that everyone, Ike Clanton, the respectable industrialists of Tombstone, the Cochise County judges, and Wyatt himself, everyone had lost faith in the legal system's ability to do justice. And that, I believe, is why we keep telling this story. Our sense of justice begins to develop very early in childhood. What parent has not heard the heartfelt cry, "That's not fair"? Even in adulthood, we are outraged when somebody gets away with something. I personally want to see Nixon in jail. I'm Italian. If we think we're going to forget a grudge, we write it down. We want to see people punished when they do wrong. For thousands of years, we have loved revenge dramas, which are, as a genre, all about holding someone responsible for a crime that has gone unpunished. I was watching The Godfather a couple of weeks ago, and at the beginning, you know how the guy comes to the Godfather during his daughter's wedding and says about how his daughter has been raped and beaten, and what does he ask? "Give me justice, Godfather. Don Corleone, give me justice." The Iliad, Hamlet, The Godfather, and Tombstone are all revenge dramas, along with pretty much every movie that Bruce Willis has ever made. In a typical revenge drama, crimes are committed in the first act. In the second act, the perpetrators appear to be getting away with it. And in the third act, they are punished when the hero exacts bloody revenge. The hero is the one who steps up when ordinary justice fails. The hero holds someone responsible, inflicts retribution, and punishes the wrongdoer. The hero is allowed to become detective, judge, jury, and executioner because the justice system seems to have failed. Which means that if you're going to give Wyatt Earp a pass for avenging Morgan's death, you got to let Ike Clanton off the hook too. A brother was killed. Justice was denied. Revenge was exacted. Of course, today, nobody thinks of Ike Clanton as a hero, but in real life and in his own time, Wyatt wasn't a hero either. He was widely considered to be a bully, a corrupted lawman, and a stone-cold killer. I'm not saying that's fair. I'm saying that's how he was perceived. That didn't change until after the First World War. In the 1920s, families still grieved for a generation of young men who died in the trenches. A great wrong had been perpetrated, but nobody could be held responsible for 38 million wrenching losses. In the decade that followed that wholesale slaughter, the public was hungry for stories of individual heroism in human-sized dramas. Not battalions being mown down by machine guns, but Sergeant York, who by himself took so many German prisoners, human-sized ones. Lowell Thomas proved this by making a lucrative, lifelong career out of selling a romantic hero that he named Lawrence of Arabia. It's a huge market for it. In America, the hunger for heroes coincided with the dawn of the motion picture industry. People were already nostalgic for the frontier in the early 1900s, and cowboy shoot-'em-ups were popular from the very start. Think about one of the early things. You see that the guy in the cowboy hat going, you know, just the smoke and all that. That's one of the very earliest iconic images from that era. The actor William S. Hart starred in dozens of these short westerns, and he became the world's first huge movie star by playing the same role over and over again. A good bad man. A good man who did bad things for good reasons. Wyatt Earp was a fan. In 1926, a writer named Walter Burns published a largely fictitious biography of Billy the Kid, whom I consider a vicious little cop killer. But Sam Goldwyn snapped up the rights, and Burns immediately went looking for somebody else whom he could glorify and sell. And Wyatt Earp fit the bill. A good bad man. A good man who did bad things for good reasons. When Burns published his book about the gunfight in 1927, it was an enormous bestseller. Now this is before you had to say a novel. You didn't have to identify books as novels. And so when he published Tombstone, the Iliad of the Southwest, people thought it was history. They took it all completely seriously. If you have that line on your Huckleberry from the movie Tombstone, I'm sorry, that's Walter Burns, that was never Doc Holliday. So they believed it.
Such a good line.
Yeah, it is good. Suddenly Wyatt Earp was the Lion of Tombstone. He was a man you could admire and name your son after. Just 5 years later, Stuart Lake published his biography, Wyatt Earp, Frontier Marshal. This was supposed to be nonfiction, but it is a rigorously sanitized version of Wyatt's life, and it was minutely supervised by his widow, Josephine Marcus Earp, who herself had a rather casual relationship with the truth. Now, women are barely mentioned in most renderings of the Tombstone story, but they are at the heart of my novel because they are at the heart of the history. And in telling Josie's story, as well as Wyatt's, I was able to chart the making of the myth. Josie did not witness the gunfight, and she was not there for the vendetta. She's the one who has made sure that the story that came down to us makes Wyatt a hero. After Wyatt died in 1929, Josie's life narrowed to a single purpose: to prune the facts, to shape the story, and to give her husband the epitaph she believed he deserved. In that, I am afraid Josie and I are rivals. I am fair to Wyatt, and I have a good deal of compassion for him, but I'm also realistic about him. At Josie's insistence, Stuart Lake created a Wyatt Earp who was sober and single, fictionally articulate, virtuous and just, fighting the Clanton gang of Tombstone like Eliot Ness facing down the Capone gang in Chicago. Think about when this was being written. It was published in '32. Since Wyatt's death, Burns's version of the gunfight became the basis of many movies and other novels. These are fiction based on fiction. And in 1954, Stuart Lake's Frontier Marshal became the basis of the aptly named television series, The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp. Truth in advertising there. On television, Wyatt finally became the man that Josie wanted us to remember. A flawless hero of the lawless West. Brave, courageous, and bold. Straightforward good guy, bad guy westerns remained popular well into the 1960s. Moral ambiguity began to sneak into the genre with The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance and the Oxbow incident, in which frontier justice is shown to be flawed at best. Then, during Vietnam, moral ambiguity became the norm, and westerns and heroes in general fell out of fashion. Even so, fascination with the gunfight at the OK Corral endures. It is emotionally satisfying to imagine settling up with Wyatt and Doc and riding with them to avenge poor Morgan's death. Yes, we think, if my brother were killed, I would want a reckoning too. For individuals to vow bloody revenge is like a nation declaring war after an attack. The ordinary list of life falls away. Responsibilities and petty annoyances are swept aside by a clarity of purpose. Even the score. Make the bastards pay. Settle this once and for all. The collateral damage, the enduring bitterness, the unhealing wounds, the shame and regrets and grief, all of those come later, when it is too late. All that is what I've tried to show in Epitaph, because the movies don't. For all of today's noise about the Second Amendment, I am heartened by the fact that most people don't buy a gun and seek retribution, even when they have just cause by the standards of Ike Clanton and Wyatt Earp. Like the McLowrys, the overwhelming majority of those bereaved by gun violence wait patiently as the wheels of justice grind. They accept the rule of law, even when they are bitterly disappointed in the findings of a court. They very often pour their grief into political action and social reform. I, for one, am grateful to them for their dignity, decency, and restraint in the face of shattering loss. Wyatt Earp's story makes better drama. Theirs makes a better world. Thank you. And, I would be happy to take questions because then it'll look like you were interested. Yes?
So I haven't read your book yet, but I'm curious. There's been such a degree of research and more material on Josie. Is that something that drew you into this?
Well, no. Okay, I'm going to be completely honest with you. How I got started on this, 2 words. Val Kilmer.
Okay.
And I want everybody to shut up about how he got fat. Okay? Who among us weighs less than we did in 1993? Just asking. Okay, so just get off his case. Yeah, I mean, it was a charm. It's a wonderful screenplay, and it's a charming portrayal. And I think that Val Kilmer got closer to the reality of the man than anybody else on film. Certainly Dennis Quaid, who lost 40 pounds to play that role. Gives you a sense of John Henry Holliday's physical frailty as he stalks along with those broomstick legs. You know, Doc was a very sick man from the time he was 21. So I got started on it because of that. And to me, Doc was the novel that I meant to write. Okay, I did not expect that I would do anything on the gunfight. I refer to it, that it was coming. It's foreshadowed all the time in Doc. But I never thought that. I thought it was so well known that there was nothing more I could bring to the table. Evidently, I got over that. And I'll tell you why. Because I was at the Tucson Book Festival doing a talk about Doc. And a woman came up to me afterwards and said, "My name is Pam Potter. I'm the great-grandniece of Tom and Frank McLowry. And I want you to know that they did not go to Tombstone on October 26, 1881 to shoot it out with the Earps. They were going to catch a stage that would take them to the Tucson Depot, and they were coming north to go to my great-grandmother's wedding." Yeah, jaw drops, and whoa, okay, that's a different spin. Because until that moment, I'd drunk the Hollywood Kool-Aid, right? It's always the lawmen against the cattle rustlers, okay? Well, one of the most surprising things I learned as I did the research for this book was that cows had nothing at all to do with the gunfight at the OK Corral. Cows were not involved in any way. It was, in fact, about gun control ordinances. They were carrying inside city limits. And the city had put through draconian gun control laws in the aftermath of a catastrophic fire and the looting that was going on afterwards, which happened on the day that President James Garfield was shot in the back by someone who was called a disappointed office seeker. They always call him that, Charlie Guiteau. Batshit crazy. He was not just disappointed, he was totally nuts. But anyway, he was able to, this is 20 years after Lincoln was killed. This is another famous Yankee who was well thought of in the North and generally hated in the South. He was a general during the Civil War. He also taught the classics, Greek and Latin, in Highland College, which is right down the road from where I live. So he was, you know, just and just months after he took office, he was shot in the back. It was in reaction to the local violence and this shocking event of another president being shot just 20 years after Lincoln. And they put through laws that were much more strict, even than the ones that were in Dodge City. Dodge City, you had to check your gun after you crossed the city limits. In Tombstone, you couldn't even carry a knife. All lethal weapons had to be checked. And Ike Clanton, Billy Clanton, Billy Claiborne, and the two McLaury brothers were carrying inside city limits. Now, is it significant that they were near the OK Corral? Yes. Because if they were leaving town, if they went there to get their horses, they were within their rights to be carrying a gun. You could pick it up before you know. So this is not the straightforward good guy, bad guy thing. There's a lot of, you know, the Second Amendment was immediately brought up when the gun control ordinances were put through by Tombstone City Council. So very, very contemporary issues all through this book. Yeah. Yeah.
First off, I love the book. It works as a story, it works as novel, as history, and thank you for writing it. It's really great. In the process where you got going, were you tempted to do a Warlock type of thing and say, I'll just write a structure around the OK Corral, but not make it the OK Corral? Or did you always decide it was going to be the historical structure?
The history is so much more interesting than anything you could make up. And I didn't think that it had ever been told right. I really felt that it was time to dig in. Now, I had a lot of advantages. You remember that you asked about the biography of Josie. Okay, that came out kind of late in my process, and in some places, I actually knew that the family was born, that came from Posen. And I told Anne about that. So I tracked them down, I found them in Posen. I got a census, So, yeah, I did not know that Josie had dementia at the end. I got that from Ann Kirshner's book. But I have also benefited by a number of good biographies that have been done of the more minor characters. With Doc, my gold standard was Karen Holliday Tanner's biography, Doc Holliday, A Family Memoir, or Family Portrait. She is his great-great-grandniece, and she had access to family papers and family information that nobody else had ever publicized before. She was the one who was willing to say, for the first time in all these generations, that John Henry Holliday was born with a cleft palate and a cleft lip, and that, in fact, it has shown up in generations since his, and might have been in the family even earlier than that, but the children probably died. I found out that John Stiles Holliday, who was a skilled surgeon, was his paternal uncle, performed the first cleft palate surgical repair in North America. It's an extraordinary family. His mother invented speech therapy for him. That's what kind of kept pulling me in. Once you know that that John Henry Holliday was born with this really catastrophic birth defect, it's a shock even now. In 1851, and this is a guy who was born to parents in Georgia, slave-owning Georgia gentry. If anybody had found out that they had this birth defect in the family, nobody would have married into it. All right? They believed in good breeding, and that was something that was not enough, but that was evidence of poor breeding. And so he had this whole big family that just enveloped him. His mother and he were very, very pleasant. So it's just a heartbreaking story. She died when he was 14. So many of these people had parents who died when they were 14. Kate, Johnny Ringo, 14 years old. There is now a biography of John Ringo. Okay, there is a biography of the McLaury brothers. You can trace them all the way back to Ireland by the lawsuits that the family. Here's the thing I love in the theme song for Wyatt Earp. One of the lines is, the West it was lawless, but one man was flawless. Now, again, like there were no cows involved with the gunfight, there was law everywhere. I mean, there were 4 different layers of law enforcement. There were all kinds of judges and magistrates and county and international law was involved with all of this. There was plenty of law. And the McLaurys were famous for filing suit. So you get a lot of information about the family by looking at the lawsuits. And there were thinner versions of the less well-known stories. Curly Bill Brocious, there was a biography, but he's really hard because he changed his name about every 6 months. He'd get into trouble and change his name. He wasn't even sure how he was going to spell it when he got to Tombstone, you know. So each one of these things gave me some sense of the reality of the people that I was working with. Johnny Ringo, I don't know if he was a psychopath. The thing about the way Westerns used to be done was that it was like they were all psychotic. All of them gun people down in vast numbers, and nobody ever has bad dreams. There's never any PTSD. And that's kind of the definition. If you can like gun people down and then go out for a drink and have a nice time, there's something seriously wrong with you. Johnny Ringo might have had tendencies that way, but you also have to take into account that his brother and his father were dying of tuberculosis. They were in a wagon train going west, so that for the same reason Doc Holliday went west, there was hope that the dry air and the sunshine would cure them. His father was cleaning a shotgun along the way, and that's not a good thing to do when you have a violent cough. You know, it's funny to laugh at now, but the top of his father's head blew off, and he looked up, and blood and brains and bone hit him in the face. And then they buried the body and moved on, like it never ever happened. And that's got to really mess with you when you're 14 years old. He was then pressed into he had to be the man of the family, you know, and he really did not want that. So this is, there's a lot going on with Johnny Ringo. I tried to bring compassion to every single person who was involved with this story, and to represent them such that, I mean, I had Pam Potter read before I sent it to New York, because I wanted to make sure that she felt that Tom Frank had been portrayed fairly. She said, well, you keep calling him little, and I said, well, you know, 5'3" sorta is really short even then. Oh, all right. That was the only thing that she found that was a problem for her, that they were little. So, yes?
A couple comments and then I have a quick question.
Okay.
One, you make it very difficult to recommend your books to other people. I mean, I don't know how many times I've been told, I don't read science fiction, or I don't read Westerns. They're not. Trust me, read them. You'll see
what a lot of times it's like you take them and grab their cheeks and look deeply into their eyes and say, don't argue with me.
That's what my friend did.
Somebody recommended that I read The Sparrow 10 years ago, and I said, yeah.
Yeah.
But that Thread of Grace looks good. I read that, and that was good. But I finally got around to reading The Sparrow last year. It was part of a group reads with Goodreads, which you participated in.
Oh, all right,
and thank you very much for that. That made
thank
it even more of an experience. And that is, at this point, the best book I have read in years.
Thank you.
It's totally amazing.
Thank you.
I just finished reading or listening to an audio version of Doc.
Isn't that a good performance?
Mark Bramhall.
Mark Bramhall did a beautiful
You could
job.
not have done better.
Yeah, really.
He was amazing.
Yeah, I hear that all the time, and it's the only one that I've been able to listen to.
Yeah.
And Doc, I have to admit to you, Doc, it's my favorite. I was so maternal about that child. You know, it starts off, he was 21 when he began to die. You know? But tuberculosis is slow and sly and subtle. My son left for the West at the same age that Doc Holliday did. He was 22. And I had just this real sense of, yes, he was competent, he was well-trained, he was going to where he could make a living, and it was, you know, I understood that. And he was so young. So I had a real sense of Doc's age and his where he was in his life, and how dreadful it was for him to then, you know, basically, Doc Holliday is like a kid who just got his shiny new degree in 2008. Bang! Right into the worst economy in years.
My question is a truth or fiction question. Did Doc Holliday really say that 90% of Texans gave the other 10% a bad name?
We don't have very much, you know, he wrote to his cousin Martha Ann, and she did join the convent. And I got a story about that as well, but she burned all his letters when he died. But the one thing, but we know it's a quote, which is in the same vein, was I have enjoyed about as much of Texas as I can stand. No, he said that. But no, I believe it was Molly Ivins who said that 90% of Texans give the other 10% of the money.
Recently, there was a documentary on PBS about the history of tuberculosis in America.
Yes.
And how it was the biggest disease of all.
Oh, yeah, it was the major killer of the 1900s, yeah, or 1800s.
Also, I've been reading a lot about pioneers, and people so much think it's Indians that were killing people. The #1 killer was disease, and #2 was accident, which pretty much took care of that father you just mentioned.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say is, after I read that, and I had read Doc and loved the book, because I grew up watching Wyatt Earp, I could sing the song.
Yeah.
I love the Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas movie, the whole bit. But I have a hunger to know what really happened. So after I saw the documentary, I looked up Doc Holliday, and this is interesting because he is criticized for being a drunk. And in one article I read, it said that he also used opium.
Towards the end.
That the opium he used and the alcohol he drank probably prolonged his life, that he wasn't expected to live more than 2 or 3.
Yes, he was given 18 to 24 months if he stayed in Atlanta. And one of the things that people don't understand today, because so few of us have any direct experience of tuberculosis, is that it's painful. It hurts. And the coughing is exhausting. Now, the reason I wasn't here in March was that I came down with pertussis, which is Latin for whooping cough. And that was 5 weeks. And it was, people break ribs, the coughing is so violent. And when I went through the first 3 weeks of the book tour for Epitaph on 5-hour energy drink and Dayquil. And I probably exposed literally thousands of people to that. I feel very bad about that. I know at least 2 people got sick because of it. I underplayed how bad tuberculosis was because it never got any better. It just kept going.
Well, this article kind of suggested that it was an intelligent act.
Yes, of course.
The drinking would subdue
He
the coughing.
didn't drink to drunkenness. You got to remember, this is a guy who has to make a living. He's got no money from home. He is past a certain point. He is unable to make a living as a dentist because the cough is too violent. To the very end of his life, he could do extractions. He retained the hand strength and the skill to be able to do an extraction quickly and get over it. All of the handwork that he did during the really fine dentistry, the stuff that he really loved, that was impossible past about 27. So to make a living on the frontier, generally it's like you got to have stamina or strength, and he had neither. So he had to play cards. He was profoundly, really, really ashamed of that. We just take it for granted. Okay, he was a gambler and gunman, Doc Holliday. That's what the movies make out of him. In those days, to be a professional gambler was like being a whore. You did to make a living what respectable people did for entertainment. So it just, he was earning his living by gambling. You can't do that when you're drunk. You have to stay as sharp as possible. It was one of the reasons that he really didn't like laudanum, which is opium dissolved in alcohol. Towards the end, the pain was so bad. In the last 2 years of his life, he turned to laudanum because it was just too awful.
Well,
And he died destitute.
But the article suggested that the combination of those things, of the alcohol and the laudanum, or whatever it's called, probably prolonged his life.
It might have. It might have. But it's hard to tell. Tell you one other story about Doc Holliday as a gambler. Okay, his cousin Martha Ann, the one that he was so fond of, the one who became a nun. Do you know why? It turns out that Doc Holliday and Margaret Mitchell share the Catholic sides of their family. They were second cousins. Now, here's the interesting part about this. Have you ever wondered why Scarlett and didn't marry Ashley? No. She was Catholic. In those days, respectable Southerners did not marry Catholics, Jews, or anybody who was at all tan. And they shared the scandalous Catholic sides of their family. Martha Ann was a Catholic. She became a nun. And if you'll remember in Gone with the Wind, one of the sisters becomes a nun, Sue Ellen, I think it was, not Sue Ellen, but the other sister. Margaret Mitchell always said that she just took bits and pieces of the stories that she grew up hearing about the war, and she parceled them out kind of at random to the characters. Except for one thing, she said that Melanie Wilkes was a portrait of Martha Ann Holliday. So if you read about Melanie, you're reading about the cousin that Doc Holliday was so fond of. She did become a nun, and her religious name was Sister Mary Melanie. Do we want
Fantastic.
one more question, or?
Any more?
Oh, okay.
Is your next book going to be in the Western?
No. I tend to work in pairs, and now I have 6 data points. You know, as a former scientist, I think in terms of, well, statistically, I don't know if we've got, but I have 6 data points, and it appears that I always work in pairs. The first 2 are classics of science fiction. The second 2 are 20th century historicals, you know, about World War II and about the making of the modern Middle East, which came at the 1920 Cairo Peace Conference. Where Lawrence of Arabia, Gertrude Bell, and Winston Churchill invented the modern Middle East, and every death since is directly attributable to the boundaries that they drew. They took 11 days in Cairo to invent the modern Middle East, and they took 2 days off to go sightseeing. A lot of thought went into that. And not a single Arab was involved with these negotiations in any way. And somebody, I got started on that one when somebody said, if you could go back in history, what would you do? And I said, you know, I would love to be able to sit down with Lawrence of Arabia, Gertrude Bell, and Winston Churchill and say, you are setting us up for at least 150 years of war. And it's all exploding. They invented Syria. They invented Iraq. Gertrude Bell drew a line about Baghdad, Mosul, and Basra and called it Iraq because she figured if you put the Sunni and the Shia and the Kurds together, they hated one another so much they would never make common cause and throw the Brits out. It worked until 1956. She served her empire well. If we had paid attention to Lawrence of Arabia, we would not be in this mess. He was kind of the Colin Powell of his time, where he was used politically and very bitter about how it all came out. So that's very topical as well. And then the 2 Westerns. So the next one, I am consistently drawn to people I feel have been unfairly maligned. Doc Holliday, for example. In 1913, at a Christmas Eve party, 59 children were killed because their parents were trying to unionize the copper mines of Calumet, Michigan. It's time for somebody to tell that story. And because I work in pairs, I suspect I'm kind of interested in Jimmy Hoffa. You know, because I'd be going from like here like the early idealistic years of the American labor movement. Then what happened? You know, and I don't know yet. I haven't done any reading on Jimmy Hoffa, but I do know 2 things. The mob killed him. Come on, the mob killed him. And the union guys said Jimmy always delivered the goods. Okay, so there's 2 data points for me to try and connect. So, but the way I write, I'll be out touring again when I'm 70. And I don't know if we'll have the focus and the concentration to be able to pump out another one. But if Jimmy Hoffa's story turns out to be interesting enough, I don't know how much is known. That might be one of those things where there's just not enough history, and I will have to make a bunch of stuff up. Certainly with the 1913 copper strike, there are little bits and pieces that are known about it. I've got 2 wonderful antagonists. The most progressive CEO in the world, James McNaughton of Calumet and Hecla Mines. Really impressive. And this amazing 25-year-old woman named Annie Clements, 6'3", gorgeous. And when they make the movie, Gwendolyn Christie has to play her. The big girl from Game of Thrones. It's 25 years old, the president of the Women's Auxiliary of the Western Federation of Miners, Local 15, she called the strike. Annie Clements said, lay the tools down, and they walked away. 15,000 men came out. So what I like about this is that was a really stupid move. You know, you're gonna you're gonna be right with her, and then you're gonna realize there's no strike fund. It's already July. It's too late. The winter 20-foot highs, drifts is coming. Winter is coming, Game of Thrones fans. And it was a stupid thing. She should have waited. They never should have struck Calumet and Hecla. They should have gone to the smaller ones. You know. So here I've got the bad guy. For my politics, the bad guy is actually very progressive. But his reaction was, after all I've done for you, grass will grow in the streets of Calumet before I recognize that. So it's like, wow. So I'm real cranked up about this one. I think I can make you care about the 1913 compromise. Okay?
Thank you so much.